I went from this to this in 9 months. Stick around to find out how. Hello everyone, semi-retired Bob here. I talk about the carnivore diet, all things related to the carnivore diet, and miscellaneous odds and ends. Today we're going to talk about one of the questions I got on my most recent video. Sylvia, I'm not going to use last names, but Sylvia sent in a question that was roughly, I've been carnivore for 5 months. My A1C went from I think she was at 5.4 or 5.5 and went up to 5.7. And she's like, help, how can I lower my A1C? And we're going to dig into that. First though, let me say welcome to everyone. If you're new here, I'm glad you're here. You may be asking yourself, Bob, what in the world are we watching here? Well, basically, you're watching me walk. What makes that significant is 9 months ago, a little over 9 months ago now, I couldn't do this. I could barely stand for 2 to 2.5 minutes without severe pain. And I'd sit down and rest for a while, then I could stand back up for a bit. But you get the idea. And now I'm not only out here walking every day, on average, I'm walking between 5 and 6 miles a day. I am trying to pick up the pace just a little bit here because one of the people that I follow thinks that higher intensity workout for a shorter amount of time is better for you. So I'm going to give it a go here, try and keep my pace up just a little bit and see if I can't get 4 or 5 laps in today at a higher rate of pace, which will be lower mileage but faster walking. For those of you returning to the channel, welcome back. I'm glad you're here as well. Sorry about the sun blasting you in the face there. I am still getting over that cold, but I do feel much, much better. And I'm hoping this getting out and walking, getting some exercise in, soaking up some of that wonderful sunshine will help things out quite a bit as well. Because I didn't sleep great last night, and after I did manage to sleep for about 4.5 hours straight, I woke up in a coughing fit. And about a half hour later, after that was over, I fell back asleep for another 4 or 5 hours and did not have nearly as much congestion when I woke up the second time. So we'll see how it goes here. One other little bit of exciting news. I've been hovering right around the edge of it for the last month or so. And this morning, I know I don't normally jump on the scale, but during the middle of the week, but I didn't scale on Saturday. But after I ate on Saturday and ate on Sunday, I figured it was okay to go ahead and jump on the scale. And I was collecting my laundry up, and my laundry bag sits on top of my scale. So unless I'm moving my laundry bag around, I can't get to it anyway. And I was making sure I had all of that collected because I'm going to go into town and do laundry tomorrow morning. I had it all collected, so I moved the laundry bag out of the way and said, what the heck, let's go ahead and step on it. I am now, today, not going to say it won't go back up because weight fluctuates, but today I am 1 pound lighter than I was back in 1981 when I raised my right hand, promised to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. in this man's army. So I'm now 1 pound lighter than when I joined the Army in 1981. I think that's pretty awesome because if you look at the timeline, I went off to basic training just a couple of days after. I mean, I think we graduated on Sunday, and then it was Tuesday that I left to go to basic. So I'm 1 pound lighter than when I graduated from high school. How cool is that? But anyway, let's get into Sylvia's question here. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is there is an error factor in any kind of testing that you get done in the lab. And 5.7 is certainly nothing to worry about until it's something to worry about, because that's literally right on the edge. I mean, 5.7 and higher is considered pre-diabetic according to the chart. 5.6 and lower is considered okay. You could get a couple little points on your A1C by I had to switch hands there, just by lab error. So I would take and just keep an eye on it, make sure you're watching what you're eating, and get checked again in 3 months, see what happens. But in the meantime, I said keep an eye on it. You're like, well, Bob, how can I do that? Well, I got a few ideas here. One of the main reason your A1C is going to go up, I'm assuming, since I'm going to take her at her word, which says I've been eating carnivore for 5 months. Now this really depends on who you're following and what you're calling carnivore. If your A1C is creeping up just a little bit and you're eating a little bit of carb, you may want to cut that out between now and your next A1C test and see what happens. Or the other thing you can do to see if perhaps it's something you're eating is ask your doctor, depending on what country you're in the United States, I believe you still have to have a prescription for a continuous glucose monitor. Some countries you don't. And if you search on Dr. Barry's website, he's got a couple of companies that you can order from. They'll sign you up as a patient and send you a continuous glucose monitor. Of course, you have to pay for it, but so that won't work if you're trying to use your insurance on it. But they're not super expensive anymore because they're becoming more common. And then with a continuous glucose monitor, you can see exactly what it is you're eating that's spiking your blood sugar. Let's back up here just a little bit and explain what the A1C test is and what it checks for. Well, it checks your red blood cells for glycation damage from glucose. What happens when your red blood cells are born, they're new, they live about 3 months, by the way. They're swimming around in the bloodstream in this, soup of everything that's in your blood, a lot of which is glucose. Well, those glucose, this is not exactly the way it works, but it's the best way I know how to describe it, because remember, I'm just a dumb retired truck driver. The glucose kind of sticks to the red blood cell, causing a little bit of glycation damage. And because we know that red blood cells on average live about 3 months, your A1C or hemoglobin A1C, how much glycation damage your red blood cells have, will tell us a 3-month average of what your blood sugar's been doing. So that's what the A1C test is. And remember, there can be not a lot, but there's a little bit of variable in there. How long you were fasting before, what time of day you had it tested, all that kind of stuff can affect results by just a little bit here and there, because the A1C test is pretty good because it takes an average among your red blood cells. Now let's remember, the A1C test just tests for glucose glycation damage. Galactose and fructose don't register on the A1C test. Now, the reason some people think that they do a little bit is because most of the time you get galactose or fructose, there's also a little bit of glucose in whatever it is you're eating. And that little bit of glucose that's mixed in with the fructose or the galactose will affect the A1C test. But if you look at all the recent videos that have been out there, Dr. Berry did one, I believe Dr. Baker did one, Dr. Chafee did one, Professor Bart K did one. Professor K and Dr. Berry kind of worked together on one, getting their information straight from the horses' mouths. The people that design and administer the A1C tests tells them very clearly that it's only looking for glucose damage. It's not looking for the other two. So if you're eating something like fruit or honey, it's not going to move your A1C a lot, but it may move it a little bit. But just remember, galactose and fructose, especially fructose, does a lot of damage, glycation damage, to the cells of your body. Just not the kind of damage that shows up on the A1C. So you want to be very careful. I'm not saying don't eat fruit and honey. Me personally, I do not. If you want to follow the fruit and honey doctor and do everything he says, I don't know that I'd do that, but you know, if you're doing okay and you feel okay with a little bit of fruit and a little bit of honey, I don't really think there's anything wrong with that, as long as it's a little bit. Because unless you're a world-class athlete, surfing 3 or 4 hours a day, plus doing all the other stuff, or, you know, if you're a young metabolically healthy person, you can also get away with eating that much fruit and honey. All of my videos are made towards my primary audience, which is the 50-plus crowd. And I have a good percentage of them that are in the 60-plus range, and still quite a few that are 70-plus. So most of my viewers do not fall into the world-class athlete, young and metabolically healthy category. Not even a little bit. Although Patty's kind of getting there. she's aging in reverse for sure. But yeah, so just be careful who you're following and what advice you're taking out there. And remember, this is not medical advice, guys. This is just the information that I could find to put down on a little sheet. In response to a question. Oh, and what I didn't say earlier in the video is my response to her that it's a complex question that she asked and deserves a complex answer. That's why I'm making today's video part of the February how to start and maintain a carnivore diet series. Because if one person has asked the question, there's going to be others out there over the course of time. So I think it's very appropriate for this video to be in the February series. Okay. Covered that. But yeah, I'm assuming you're not eating carbs. One of the other things to be aware of, I'm not saying that this is what has happened, but what could be happening is you are a late onset diabetes type 1 or misdiagnosed type 1. The way you check this is the next time you go into your doctor's office, make sure he gets a fasting insulin and a C-peptide test, because those are ironclad tests that will show. I mean, if you have a fasting insulin of 0, you're not making any insulin. I don't remember what the C-peptide levels are, but it's in Dr. Barry and Kim Howerton wrote a book, Common Sense Labs. You can get that, take a look at it, and see what the normal levels are for a C-peptide reading. But those two tests will definitively tell you if you're truly a type 1 or a type 2. And that's something you need to know. It's probably not that. I would say that the odds of that are very, very, very low. But it's worth checking into. What I suspect is happening, and that's what Dr. Mason suggests is happening, his buddy and that great researcher, computer scientist, Mr. Feldman, that came up with this theory. And I think it's a pretty darn good theory. As we get healthier, our red blood cells could be living longer. Because remember, they live on average about 90 days, 3 months. But what if all of them or most of them are living an extra 10 days? Well, they swim around in the soup of your blood and get, have an extra 10 days or so, maybe even longer, to get glycated, which is going to falsely raise your A1C. Well, your A1C test is not going to be falsely raised. It is what it is. But they're basing those numbers on an average of them living 90 days. But if those red blood cells are living 100, 110 days, maybe even an extra whole month at 120 days, is the A1C being slightly elevated really pathological? Does it mean you don't have good control over your blood sugar? I don't think that's the case at all. That's also something to look into. Now, Dr. Mason said there was a test. Couldn't find it to get the name of it. Maybe one of you smart people out here watching can add the name of the test down in the comments. But there is a lab test where they can test to see how many young red blood cells you have. So they can tell from that about how long your red blood cells are living. So, if... Sorry guys, this faster pace is starting to get to me just a little bit. But I think it's good. If the red blood cells, if that test shows less than expected young red blood cells, that means your red blood cells are living a little longer and they have more time to get glycated. Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're going to get some glycation damage to your red blood cells, because through gluconeogenesis we make the glucose our body needs. The thing that damages you prematurely and at a high level is dumping exogenous carbohydrates down our throat. And that's something we don't want to do. And make sure I've covered everything here. So, Sylvia, I hope that answers your question. If you're really concerned about this, because I know most people's insurance will only pay for an A1C test every so often. There is a company, PTS Diagnostics, and you can find the link to them on any of Dr. Barry's A1C videos, of which he has quite a few. And you get 4 tests. It's not super cheap, but it's not super expensive. I want to say it's like somewhere between $80 and $120, if I'm remembering right. But that can be a lot cheaper than just going into your doctor's office and saying, can you check my A1C? And I'll pay for it if my insurance doesn't. Because you're going to have to pay for the doctor's visit and the test and the lab to draw the blood and all that stuff. That can get pretty expensive. So you can get 4 do-it-yourself at home tests from PTS Diagnostics. And that way you can do it yourself every 3 months to see where you're at, if you're really concerned about it. In your case, Sylvia, I wouldn't go that route just yet, because the little bit you've gone up could have been lab error, and it could just be that you've added something to your carnivore diet that you probably shouldn't. If I were you and going to spend money on this today, I'd go get that continuous glucose monitor, and that way you can get almost immediate feedback on everything you eat. Now, are the blood glucose readings from that glucose monitor super accurate? Not really, but we're not looking at the actual numbers. All we're looking at is the trending line. If you are staying fairly flat, then something's not spiking your blood sugar. Now remember, you don't want to stay in a non-insulin state all the time. That one meal a day, you want to make sure that you're eating enough protein to cause your insulin to go up. Because if you're not eating enough, and this is why people that don't eat enough habitually run into problems down the road, is, insulin is a hormone. You have to have it. And if you're continually not eating enough to trigger that hormone response, insulin continues to go down and down and down, and all the other hormones go up and up and up, and all of a sudden you're in a hormone imbalance situation, and that can be tough to deal with. So make sure, and again, this is why I recommend a continuous glucose monitor for people looking at this. Make sure that at least one of your meals every day, you're getting enough food, enough protein to cause that insulin to respond, make insulin, because your blood sugar has gone up. Now, one last little thing here. Let's say you've been involved in a bet at work about who can lower their A1C the fastest, or you need to get it down quickly because your job is going to raise your insurance rates if you don't. I don't recommend this. And this was Dr. Barry's idea in one of his videos. So I can't take credit for coming up with this because I didn't. But there is a little hack you can do if you need to bring your A1C down in a hurry. For, like I said, for a test that's for a job or health insurance or any of that kind of stuff. About 3 weeks before the test, go give blood. Not only are you helping a lot of people with that donated blood, you're getting rid of all that glycated red blood cells. And then over the next couple of weeks, as your bone marrow spits out new red blood cells, those will all be unglycated, and your A1C will show up down a little bit. Now, this is no indication of health. This is just the little hack that you're doing to win a bet with a buddy about who can get their A1C lowest. So, if you do this and your A1C comes in 3 to 4% lower, don't pat yourself on the back and think you've gotten healthier. No, you've just cracked the code to making it go. Okay, I'm back again. Got my Amazon delivery. And while I was carrying that to the trailer, I decided to sit down for a minute and a half and drink some water. Because this faster pace is starting to get to me, but that's good. But I think I've covered everything I needed to cover. But the Amazon delivery interrupted the fact that I was about to say, stick around for my final thoughts on this subject. But for now, let's cue the music. Here I am back again. Got my walk done. A little bit on the tired side, but not terribly so. I may try and push the speed just a little bit further. My ultimate goal, because I normally do, it normally takes me about 22 to 23 minutes to get a mile in. And I'm trying to push that to 15 minutes a mile, which would make it 4 miles an hour, which I think is a pretty solid exercise level of walking. But the thing I wanted to talk to you about here real quick at the end, the difference in the way we thought 40 years ago versus today. Now, I'm not fat shaming, I'm not obesity shaming, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just stating the way it was. Many of you have commented about how thin I'm beginning to look, and I think I'm starting to look thin as well. Here's the thing. While I was in the Army, when I first went into the Army and continued to be in the Army, sorry, I'm looking that way because Miss Jessica's getting ready to get out of here for the day, which seems a little early, but I guess it is 4 o'clock. But, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, the whole time I was in the Army, my nickname was Heavy. Remember, many of you have said how thin I look, but back then, I was the heaviest guy in my unit. Basic training, advanced training, and in my actual unit, I was the heaviest guy there, height-weight ratio. I mean, you could physically see that I was the fattest guy in the room. And that just shows how much different we think now, because if you look around on average, I'm one of the thinnest guys in the room. But I'm not really thin yet by real standards that we used to have back in 1980, 81. But by today's standards, I'm fairly thin. It just gives you a little something to think about as we move forward. So don't get it into your head that you have to set a goal, and this is where I absolutely have to get with my weight. You don't. Just let your body decide where you're going to be. I initially set my goal at 160 pounds because it's right in the middle. But if I only lose another 10 or 15 pounds, that'd be all right. If I end up losing another 45 or so and end up down, much lower than that, that's okay too. But the differences in how we see people today, I found that very interesting. I thought of that while I was out walking around doing the rest of my laps. But anyway, that's what I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video today. Have a great day, everyone. Don't forget to be 1% better today. I'll see you tomorrow.